This is CNN Breaking News.
I'm Allison Cossack in New York. We begin this hour with a series of stunning developments in Elon Musk's ongoing takeover bid for Twitter. The billionaire CEO announcing just hours ago that the $44 billion deal to take Twitter private is now on hold, and then tweeting hours later that he's not ready to walk away just yet. Twitter shareholders reacting negatively to the news. Shares initially fell more than 20%. They have since bounced back a bit. They're currently down about 13%. So, of course, many questions as this story develops, including what is Musk's endgame here? And is he angling for a better price during this volatile time for tech? I want to bring in Rahel Solomon. She is going to talk more about this for us. Great to see you, Rahel. So, we know that Elon Musk has been negotiating this Twitter deal on Twitter since the beginning, but it really makes you wonder if the SEC should be stepping in at this point, because it's really investors being tossed about here.
So many questions, Allison. Good to be with you. Yes, in the words of one analyst, this is a circus show that is turning into a Friday the 13th horror show. Let's start with 6 a.m. this morning. This is when the story sort of all began. That's when Elon Musk tweeted, as you pointed out, that yes, the Twitter deal was temporarily on hold, pending details supporting calculation that spam fake accounts do indeed represent less than 5% of users. Well, that tweet sent pre-market shares of Twitter plunging. Short time later, at about 8 a.m., just before 8, he tweeted perhaps a clarification that he was still committed to the acquisition. Look, we do know that Elon Musk has said from the beginning, when he announced his interest in Twitter, that he wanted to fix Twitter and also rid the company of spam bots. So if you are to believe Musk at his word, perhaps the news, that Reuters article suggesting that it's not as big of an issue as he initially expected. When I asked Dan Ives, an analyst who covers Twitter very closely, about that, he said, that's like saying the dog ate your homework. He wasn't buying it. But look, in any event, investors and the market's now trying to game out and figure out, was this a ploy to perhaps renegotiate at a lower price? We know his offer was $54.20. Or is this really an excuse for him to walk away? So many questions.
Yeah, so he tweeted he's committed to this deal, but investors, at least a bunch of investors, are still committed to selling this stock. I mean, investors really getting hit with this, not just with Twitter, but we are seeing actually shares of Tesla in the green.
Move on this, exactly. So as you pointed out, shares of Twitter plunged on this news. They then bounced back a little bit after we got that clarification or the second tweet. Look, when he announced his interest to buy Twitter, I want to show you a year-to-date chart of Twitter, and you can sort of see the price action. But when Elon Musk announced his bid to buy Twitter, you saw shares pop. That was in April there. And then when Twitter's board accepted the offer, it popped to $51.70. And as you can see, as of yesterday, it was closing at $45.09. So nowhere near the $54.20. Which was his offer. And he did say in his SEC filing that he knew he was buying it at a premium. But to your point, tech has been getting quite a beating as of late, and Twitter shares are now closer to $45. So does $54.20 still seem like a great deal, a great price or valuation for Elon Musk? Unclear. What we can see, however, is that Tesla owners, Tesla shareholders seem to like this news. Those shares are up about 7% pre-market. And from the beginning, Allison, as you know, Tesla investors were never really thrilled about this deal to begin with. For one reason, because Elon Musk would likely have to leverage some of his shares in order to pull off this deal, but also because would running Twitter distract Elon Musk from running Tesla? Of course, he is the visionary founder of the company. And so Tesla owners were never really crazy about this deal to begin with. And so perhaps Twitter's loss is Tesla shareholders' gain.
Something tells me we'll all be watching Twitter, at least Elon Musk's account today. Rahel Solomon, thanks so much. Let's bring in Chief Media Correspondent Brian Stelter to kind of dissect this tweet. Brian, what's your take on this calculation in the first tweet? Him saying that fake accounts and bots make up less than 5% of users.
Yeah, first of all, bots and spam, fake accounts are a plague on Twitter. They have been for years. And to suggest that they're just a small portion of the total user base, give me a break. Elon Musk must know better than that. He's on the site. He sees the problem. He sees the pollution when he uses the site. So this has all the trappings of negotiations, of Musk trying to get a lower price, trying to reprice this deal. And he very well may be able to do that. But whether the banks are on board, his finances are on board, is an open question. And then I think the other question is, how much does he really want this? I think he is determined to lead Twitter, to have his vision for Twitter be the future of Twitter. But it's more fun for him to have this deal be in the works and to spout off on Twitter and get everyone's attention. It's almost like it's more fun to be doing the deal than it is to actually own Twitter. You know what I mean? So I think we have to look to that breakup fee, a $1 billion breakup fee. That is what he would owe if he walks away. So he may be trying to get the price down without paying that $1 billion breakup fee. But I think that's what we have to eye now. Is he actually going to go through with this, or is he going to pay that $1 billion, let the stock decline, and then come back around with a new bid for Twitter?
Brian, what do you think are the political ramifications here if Musk walks away, particularly for Republicans, who wanted to reinstate Donald Trump's account?
Well, that's the thing, right? It's more fun for him to talk a big game on Twitter and say, I'm going to bring Donald Trump back, and I think he's not the best candidate, but he shouldn't have been banned. It's like almost more fun for Musk to pretend to be CEO than it is to actually own it, and then have to actually own the decisions you make and own the responsibility and the consequences. But what does it mean for Republican politicians? There has been a surge of follower growth, of new accounts coming into Twitter among conservatives in the U.S. because they believe Musk is going to take over Twitter. So already there's been a change in the Twitter user base with conservatives more interested in the platform. Donald Trump, of course, has not come back. He is still banned for now. Whether he comes back and in what way, it would be a question, I think, down the line in the months to come. But this would have consequences politically because we've already seen Twitter become more popular among conservatives, maybe a little less so among Democrats or liberals in the U.S. And of course, this spans the entire world where the policies Musk would put in place, much more permissive content moderation, that would affect many different political environments around the world. So now I guess we just look at his Twitter account and see. I'd love to know what regulators at the SEC think about all this, though. They must feel so equipped to deal with the likes of Musk right now.
Yeah, I really think regulators really need to step in, and they have to be a lot faster about it, right? We shall see what happens today. Brian Stelter, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks.
In Jerusalem, Israeli police have used batons to beat mourners during the funeral of the slain Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Authorities were seen hitting several people carrying her coffin. The crowd was temporarily pushed back before it was allowed to proceed to a church. Atika Schubert is at Mount Zion Cemetery. Atika, I know there was an expectation here that an escalation in tensions could happen at her funeral. What are you learning?
Well, we were there at the hospital when it happened, and essentially the family, but mostly mourners, hundreds of mourners who showed up there, wanted to have a funeral procession walking the coffin out. But the Israeli police said no, that would not be allowed, fearing that it would escalate. When then the pallbearers tried to take the coffin out, Israeli riot police then charged them, moving into the hospital grounds, and at one point targeting those pallbearers, nearly knocking the coffin to the ground. It was a dramatic scene. It was very tense. There were tear gas and flash grenades thrown. It was certainly frightening for many of the mourners that were there. However, the family then took charge and said that they would simply drive the coffin to the church, not have a walking funeral procession. An agreement was reached with Israeli police, who were then able to withdraw some of the riot police there. Then they moved to the church, and what we saw really in the procession here was quite stunning. Thousands of Palestinians coming out to show an outpouring of grief for Shireen Abu Akleh. And now we're here at the cemetery where her coffin is now being placed next to her parents at Mount Zion Cemetery. Allison.
All right, Atika Schubert, thanks for all of your reporting. And now to the latest from Ukraine, where Russian troops are pulling back from the country's second largest city, Kharkiv, in the northeast. These are pictures of 3 bridges destroyed around Kharkiv. It is believed Russians blew them up to stop advancing Ukrainian troops. Ukraine has been making steady gains there. On Snake Island, which has become symbolic of Ukrainian defiance, new video has emerged of a Russian helicopter being destroyed by a Ukrainian missile strike. Ukraine says it has destroyed multiple Russian assets on the island in recent weeks, and that a Russian support ship is on fire and being towed away from the island. CNN has not been able to verify that claim. Russia is threatening Finland with retaliation after Finnish leaders gave their backing to NATO membership. Former President Dmitry Medvedev warning that Russia would seriously strengthen ground, naval, and air defenses on its western flank. Russia may be icing out Finland, but lines of communications remain open with Germany. President Vladimir Putin speaking with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz today. According to the Kremlin, they discussed the situation in Ukraine and the evacuation of the Azovstal plant in Mariupol. Meantime, in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, the first war crime trial is being held since the Russian invasion. A 21-year-old Russian soldier is accused of killing an unarmed civilian in February. Melissa Bell is in Kyiv for us. Melissa, so what are you expected to hear in court today?
Well, this was just a preliminary hearing. The rest will come on Wednesday. Vadim Shishimarin, a 21-year-old Russian soldier, was asked to state his name and his age and so on in order to establish his identity. It is the very beginning of a trial, but an extraordinary trial, Alison, because what we're talking about is a trial for war crimes in a civilian court that is being held even as the war continues to rage on, as you were just saying, in the south and in the east of Ukraine. Now, of course, international justice is also doing its thing. There have been dozens of teams, forensic teams on the ground here, the International Criminal Court, but also the UN Human Rights Council. A dozen or so international teams have also been here. There will be investigations and national jurisdictions holding their own trials. We're hearing from the country's prosecutor general. But this was a Ukrainian trial of that incident that took place in the very north of the country on the 28th of February, 4 days after the war began, when that unarmed civilian was killed on his bicycle, even as he was on his phone, not very far from his house. So just the beginning of what it seems will be a historic trial. Now, the woman who's in charge, the country, Ukraine's general prosecutor, we managed to speak to her today to ask her about it, and she explained why it was so important that even as the war went on, even as the Ukrainian economy is on its knees, justice be done and the judiciary stay upright in order that this trial can take place in these extraordinary circumstances. Because, she said, it is about ensuring for the first time, given the technology that's here in Ukraine, given the documenting of these war crimes, these alleged war crimes, even as they've happened, thanks to the technology, the presence of journalists, the fact that the whole world is watching, she wanted to use that in order to change the sense of impunity that soldiers have traditionally had during wartime. Have a listen.
These proceedings now can save lives of our Ukrainian civilians on the south and eastern part of Ukraine, because these perpetrators who are now fighting will see that we will find all of them, we will identify all of them, and we will start to prosecute all of them.
Now, we spoke after that preliminary hearing to the defense lawyer, the man who will represent Vadim Shishimarin, and we asked him whether he believed his client, this 21-year-old Russian soldier, would get a fair trial. He said that he had faith in the Ukrainian judiciary. The prosecutor had told us earlier that this trial was based on the facts that had been collected by all these international specialized teams, that the trial would be entirely transparent and held according to the standards of Ukrainian justice, that both told us they believed was entirely independent. But Alison, the question that poses itself in this extraordinary trial, again, the first time that I can think of that this has been tried, is the question of the emotion around it. That is going to be one of the challenges, both for the independence of the judiciary, the prosecutors and the defense, because even as the war rages on, emotions, as you'll understand, and it is normal, are extremely raw. And we had an interesting moment when we caught up with the court's translator, who does the translating for Vadim Shishimarin. We asked her what she felt about being involved. She said, look, I don't feel hatred for him because the tears of Russian mothers are just as salty as our own. Alison.
Oh, those are emotional words. Melissa Bell, thank you so much. And these are the stories making headlines around the world. The president of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan, has died at the age of 73. Becky Anderson looks at his legacy.
When Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan was born in 1948, the United Arab Emirates didn't even exist as a nation. This was a land where many earned their living by fishing or pearling. But his family was instrumental in transforming this into one of the world's largest oil producers. By the time the UAE, a federation of 7 states, was created in 1971, Sheikh Khalifa was the crown prince of the wealthiest state and country's capital, Abu Dhabi. He took over the presidency in 2004 after the death of his father, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan, the nation's founder. Like his father, he wished to modernize his country, shaping it into a haven of stability in a volatile neighborhood. At home, he invested in the country's armed forces and developed its lucrative energy sector. His success spelled out on Dubai's skyline, where one of the tallest buildings in the world, the Burj Khalifa, took on its leader's name after the government bailed Dubai out of its debt woes in 2009. Overseas, he solidified traditional alliances with countries like the UK while boosting trade ties with new partners. Under his leadership, the UAE invested its enormous wealth in globally recognized airlines, prized assets, sporting powerhouses and major global events that have collectively put the country on the map, turning it into a global tourist destination. By the early 2010s, deteriorating health increasingly kept Sheikh Khalifa out of the public limelight. He underwent surgery after suffering a stroke in 2014. But his modernising vision for the country has carried on under the leadership of his half-brother and Abu Dhabi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Zayed. It's taken bold diplomatic steps, such as establishing relations with Israel through the Abraham Accords, and hosting the first ever papal visit to the Arabian Peninsula, positioning itself as a tolerant Middle Eastern society, all the while delicately balancing relations with Western and non-Western powers alike. It's used its military might to project power, sometimes controversially, in places like Yemen, and it's been diversifying its economy to cut its reliance on oil revenues, investing in renewable and nuclear energy, while taking steps such as allowing for complete foreign ownership of companies and introducing a golden visa program to maintain its position as an attractive destination for foreign investment and talent. It's even entered the space race, becoming the first ever Arab country to send a mission to Mars, aptly named Hope. It is, by all accounts, a country transformed. And that is how Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan leaves it to his successor.
North Korea says an explosive COVID outbreak is underway, with 6 people believed to have died and hundreds of thousands of infections. That's according to state media. Pyongyang calls the situation a major national emergency. It comes one day after the secretive regime reported its first coronavirus case. Straight ahead, more on why Elon Musk says his Twitter takeover is now on hold. And stable by name, so why the drama? We look at the so-called stablecoin at the heart of a crypto crash. Welcome back. I'm Allison Cossack. Call it perhaps the pause that refreshes Wall Street. U.S. futures are trading higher. The Nasdaq set to rise for a second straight session. A bit of a better picture here after a volatile week that saw the S&P 500 dip perilously close to bear market levels, or a drop of 20%. That said, many stocks in the S&P 500 already are sitting in bear territory. We're also closely watching breaking news out of Twitter. As we have been reporting all morning, shares of the social media giant are falling on news that Elon Musk is putting his $44 billion takeover deal for the company temporarily on hold. More on that later in the show. But first, here with his take on the broader market action, let's bring in Brian Levitt. He's the global market strategist at Invesco. Brian, thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So we are seeing green arrows this morning, but overall it's been just stomach churning all week. How bad is it going to get here? Are we getting close to capitulation here? Is this really a market in the process of putting a bottom on this?
Yeah, I mean, we are getting closer. It's going to be difficult to pinpoint the exact moment, but we are getting closer. And you talk about capitulation, or you think about some of the washout in the market. One of the things I look at is the percentage of stocks in the New York Stock Exchange trading above their 200-day moving average. Usually when you're around bottoms, the average is around 15%. We were 50% at the end of March, 5-0. We've come down to 22%. So that's a significant move. Almost 80% of the market is trading below its 200-day moving average. So that's a significant move. We're getting closer.
So you're thinking this is an oversold situation?
Well, it's an environment in which interest rates went up significantly, and given the inflationary environment, and the bond market's undefeated. Anytime you see interest rates move up like that, you see an equity market valuation adjustment. So, whether or not it was warranted, it was an environment in which, when the discount rate changes, equity valuations adjust. We've gone a decent way. Are we oversold? I don't know if we're oversold, but we're moving in that direction. We're getting closer to where that the more of the capitulation has happened and a bottom starts to be put in for these markets.
So much of the nervousness stems from inflation that is raging in the economy. Do you think that we are less at peak inflation, or is this just more at a situation of persistent inflation? We got the latest inflation numbers. They're showing it's slowing a bit, but does 1 month really create a trend?
Right, and a tense place in a CPI report for a massive economy. But I think what you asked doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. We are likely at peak inflation, but it could still be persistent for some time. And so what's going to end up happening here is that demand's going to slow, driven by the Fed, driven by what's happened with equities, driven by mortgage rates, and the economy's going to moderate, which will start to bring down inflationary pressures. Now, when I say persistent, it's not going to fall to 2% anytime soon. But what the market needs to see, remember, markets don't trade on good or bad. They trade on whether things are better or worse relative to expectations. And so what we need to see in the coming months is that the inflation picture is getting better relative to expectations. If you look in the bond market, if you look at the break-evens, that's what the picture is telling you. The one-year break-even was over 6%. So that's the bond market's expectation for inflation just a couple of weeks ago. I looked yesterday, it was around 4.6, 4.7%. So that's a pretty significant move, portending a pretty significant slowdown in the economy. Good news, sometimes bad news for the economy could be good news. And so it is likely to moderate from here.
Was it a mistake, do you think, for Fed Chair Jay Powell to take 75 basis points or 0.75% of a move higher off the table? And do you think that the Fed could put that back on the table?
Well, I think they should front load these rate hikes. Now, far be it from me to tell Jay Powell what he's currently doing is a mistake. But I would like to see them front load these moves and determine, how's the economy adjusting to. I mean, look, if you look at where the 2-year rate is, the 2-year rate that's gone from 20 basis points in October to 2.7 recently, that's a bond market that's priced in a lot of this. So why don't we get on with it? And the bond market's priced in a lot of it without significant cracks in the credit market. The dollar's rallied, but not unbelievably. So, yeah, I think we should get on with it.
I'm curious where you are placing recession odds for next year.
Look, I mean, in any year, you're 1 in 10. And when you've got the yield curve as flat as it is, you start moving closer to, 1 in 3 probability. The 3-month 10-year is still quite wide, though. And so typically how this plays out is it's not the 2s, 10s, it's when the Fed flattens the yield curve from 3-month to 10-year. And so we'll likely be there by early 2023. History suggests that you're then 12 to 18 months from a recession, but we're moving quickly here. And I think my hope is that inflation moderates, Fed backs off, and the cycle can continue.
All right, Brian Levitt, thanks for your time today. Thanks for your perspective.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And the market open is next. Welcome back. I'm Allison Cossack. The opening bell there sounding on Wall Street, and nothing to fear just yet on this Friday the 13th. U.S. stocks are trading higher across the board. The second day of gains for the Nasdaq, but tech still down substantially this week. And the Dow remains on track for its 7th straight week of losses, its longest losing streak in decades. Meantime, shares of Twitter opening sharply lower after Elon Musk's series of tweets earlier today. Musk saying he remains committed to taking Twitter private. He is, however, putting his $44 billion deal for the company on hold. Let's talk more about this. I want to bring in Paul LaMonica. You've been tweeting about this all morning, a little sarcasm here and there. How can you not? I mean, Elon Musk is negotiating this deal for Twitter on Twitter and causing such chaos with the stocks. At this point, do you think that he's losing credibility with investors because of everything that he's doing to these companies on Wall Street?
I don't think it's helping, Allison, definitely. I mean, it's hard to say that Elon Musk can ever truly lose all credibility because he is the world's richest person. He obviously controls Tesla and SpaceX. He has done a lot in the automotive and world of space exploration to really still make him an icon in the world of business. That being said, this behavior on Twitter is erratic, to put it mildly, and I think investors clearly are losing confidence. Is this a negotiating ploy? I wrote earlier this week about how some people think Musk would need to lower the takeover price for Twitter in order to get a deal done that makes economic sense. Or is Musk growing bored and going to try and find something else to focus his attentions on as it becomes a little bit more challenging for him to pull off this Twitter deal, especially if he is questioning some of the user data metrics?
Yeah, I mean, he could be entertaining himself with the tweets about straws, of course, which he was the buildup before he got to the tweet about the deal on hold. And I mentioned companies because, as we're watching Twitter shares fall, we were watching Tesla shares go up. And so it feels just like it's manipulation here, and you wonder where the SEC is in all this. When are regulators going to step in or at least say something?
Yeah, the SEC obviously has cracked down on Musk before, Allison, for some of his tweets, probably the most famous one being the funding secured when funding wasn't apparently actually secured for, a deal that he was talking about to maybe take Tesla private. I think that regulators are probably trying to do the best they can to keep an eye on this ongoing developing situation. But Musk tweets so often that it is hard for anyone in the SEC, let alone the financial media, to stay on top of every single utterance from Elon Musk and what's going to be happening next and what his true motivations might be.
Yeah, but it would be nice to hear something, and maybe this time, just this time, we will. Paul and Monica, thanks so much for your perspective on this. Bitcoin has bounced back above $30,000 today after a sharp sell-off on Thursday, but that doesn't tell the whole story on cryptocurrencies. The big focus this week is on stablecoin and the collapse in the value of one coin, Terra USD. They may not be the biggest name among investors, but stablecoins are big money. Their total value was $180 billion in March. Stablecoins, as the name suggests, were designed to offer a stable way to enter the cryptocurrency world, contrasting with currencies like Bitcoin, whose values undergo wild swings. Some stablecoins are pegged in the value to real-world assets or currencies, the peg being maintained by reserves of the real assets, such as U.S. dollars. But a more obscure type of coin, known as algorithmic stablecoins, are meant to maintain a steady value through complex financial engineering. Terra USD was tied to a crypto coin called Luna. Traders were able to exchange Terra and Luna coins to forever maintain a value of 1 Terra to $1. But this week, that arrangement fell apart, the value of Terra collapsing to 23 cents at one point, wiping out billions of dollars off investors' accounts. Joining us now is Charles Cascarilla. He's the CEO and co-founder of Paxos. It's a finance and tech company that specializes in blockchain. Charles Cascarilla, welcome to the show. And I'm so glad to have you on and get your perspective. The burning question that so many are asking is, does anyone really know yet what happened to set this into motion to cause Terra to lose its peg to the U.S. dollar?
Great to be on, Allison. The answer is we don't know exactly why it happened, but the reality is it wasn't backed by anything. So it was only a matter of time until this would happen. Why was it today versus tomorrow or three weeks ago? We can't really get to that. But what we can think about is what is a way to really construct a stablecoin? Ultimately, a stablecoin is supposed to be, as you were saying, something that's backed by an underlying asset. And really, when you want a digital dollar, why does someone want a digital dollar? They want a dollar that can move 24/7 instantaneously anywhere in the world. And they want it to be a dollar. And so in order to be a dollar, you have to be backed by dollars, which is basically T-bills. In this case, you were just backed by an algorithm. And, at some point, the algorithm can't work because it's just based on faith.
How much is what's happening with Terra, with Luna, and in some case, a little bit Tether, although it's come back today, how much is that sort of casting a cloud over cryptocurrencies overall? We did see, of course, Bitcoin taking a big hit. It's bouncing back as well. But how much is what's happening in the algorithmic stablecoin area affecting cryptocurrencies and cryptocurrencies' credibility?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reality is it is hurting. $22 billion loss in total value in just a matter of days is a big hit. On the other hand, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. This technology is fundamentally transformative. Our financial system needs to be really reformed and shifted so that it can operate at the speed of the internet. And it's not doing that today. It runs 9 to 5 and it runs in batch processes. It takes days to move things. That's not what we want either. So I think it's important to keep in mind the fundamentals, that this is really going to transform how our economy works. But there's going to be some bumps along the road. You don't want it. Periods of creative destruction can be healthy. But even in the internet, you had Amazon go from $100 down to $2 as one of the most iconic companies in the world right now. And you had pets.com that didn't change the value of the internet. We had algorithmic stablecoins. It's an unfortunate situation for sure, but it doesn't change the long term of what this technology represents.
Yeah, how much do stablecoins really, how important are they for the crypto ecosystem as a whole?
Well, they're very important because you need dollars in the system in order to move it around. Interestingly, even though everyone talks about cryptocurrencies, I can tell you that what the number one product people want around the world is the US dollar. And the thing is, people want real dollars. They want to know that they're going to really be there for them. And so in the case of Paxos, we issue 2 different stablecoins. One is called USDP, the other is BUSD. And I think there's some really fundamental differences in how we have built our products in order to serve this really important need for how can you move dollars at the speed of the internet. And there's really a couple things that differentiate us. The first is, are you fully reserved? Are you fully backed by T-bills, not by even U.S. government bonds that can fluctuate in value, or commercial paper or mortgage-backed securities? How can you be truly a dollar at any moment in time? And that is a promise that we absolutely make to all of our customers. The second thing is, you don't have to believe Paxos because we're fully regulated. We're the only firm that is issuing a regulated stablecoin. We have a primary regulator, the New York Department of Financial Services, one of the best financial regulators in the whole world. So you don't have to believe Paxos. You can understand that we have oversight and no one else does. And I think the last thing is, it's undisputably the safest stablecoins in the world are Paxos stablecoins. Nothing that what happened with Luna can happen to a Paxos stablecoin. That's because we construct it a certain way, we have oversight, and so there can be real confidence to use this product. And it really is transformative for the world.
You know, Janet Yellen called stablecoins a threat to financial stability, and she wants regulation. Is Yellen wrong?
No, I think she's right that you need to have regulation. And if it's built incorrectly, you can have instability. That's what we saw with Luna and Terra. 100%, I think she's making an accurate point. It's one that we really support. That's why we alone have built this regulated stablecoin suite of products that is so much different from what others have done. Because the idea is, you should be able to have a dollar that moves like the internet, but you should have a dollar that you can believe in and trust. How do you marry those two concepts together? In our view, it's by being regulated, by having oversight, by not just having to believe Paxos, but by knowing that there are other people who are making sure that what we say is actually what we're doing.
All right, Charles Cascarilla, CEO and co-founder of Paxos. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here.
And from digital currencies to the power of tech in the real world, we'll speak to the company using drones to get life-saving supplies to people in Ukraine. Modern-day tech to help people affected by modern-day warfare. That's the mission of drone company Dragonfly, which is teaming up with a medical devices supplier to get crucial equipment to people in Ukraine. It could be a lifeline for people in hard-to-reach areas. The drones can carry up to 35 pounds of temperature-controlled items like insulin, blood, vaccines, and first aid kits. And they can also enable vital search and rescue operations. Cameron Chell is Dragonfly's CEO and joins us now. Cameron, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Talk us through how many of your drones have already been in Ukraine and how many more are going and what they're doing there.
So the first shipment of drones arrived late last week, where we completed our training and mission profiles with the pilots that are on the ground there. There's up to 200 drones that will be delivered before the end of summer. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 18 that are either in theater or on their way to theater currently.
And talk to me about what they're carrying. I understand, obviously, they're carrying medical supplies, but are they carrying other supplies as well? And what about search and rescue? What kind of role are they playing there?
Yeah, there's three primary drones that we're actually putting into the area. The first or the most prevalent drone is what we call the MRD, the medical response drone. So this is a unique drone that Dragonfly has developed that carries this 35 pounds of temperature-sensitive supplies into besieged areas primarily at the moment. The biggest call that is required is for insulin and antibiotics. People that are obviously diabetic and can't get access to insulin, or those many of which are injured and are facing risk of infection. But there are even calls for things as simple as just getting water into certain places. So that's the primary function. These are drones that can operate from up to 20 kilometers away. So it keeps the operators at a safe distance. They have full optics. They can see everything that's going on. The drones can either land and the packages can be removed, or they can be dropped from a safe distance as well, and the drone can get out of theater quite quickly. There's also, sorry.
No, finish your thought. Finish your thought.
Well, there's also a search and rescue drone, which is a smaller drone, which is very, very fast and carries thermal sensors, which are used primarily to look for people that are in debris situations to save time. They're looking for heat signatures. Some of our technology can even read the vital signs of people that might be in those situations. And then we have a third drone that flies at a very high altitude. It's a vertical takeoff, horizontal flight drone that really provides situational awareness and reconnaissance for the search and rescue teams to ensure that there's not danger coming in from outside areas as they're doing search and rescue missions.
Clearly these drones are going in where it's dangerous territory. And in your earnings call, you talked about how this is not just a feat of engineering, but it's also, you have to tackle logistics and training too. How do you keep these drones safe to get to where they need to go to bring these vital supplies and do the vital work?
You raised such a good point. The engineering and the work and the project management all combine to be able to provide a platform that can ensure that there's some humanitarian aid getting into this area and saving lives. The pure logistics of getting the equipment in a regulated manner, in a manner that everybody knows that it's safe, they know that these aren't combatant type of drones and such, and then doing the training of the personnel it's a big lift. The engineering just seems almost pale by comparison sometimes. However, that being said, it's a really important part of the overall mission profile and something that Dragonfly is really specialized in. In terms of keeping these drones safe, the reality is right now, getting ambulances or equipment into these areas just isn't possible. They either get shot, they get confiscated, they can't get through debris or such. And so you bring these drones in from a safe distance. And we've had a lot of questions of people saying, what if they get shot down or what if they get destroyed? But who cares? Just send more. Like, the reality is these drones cost a fraction of the cost of the ordnance that are used to destroy these areas or these buildings. And so, if a drone gets shot down, we'll send 5 more. I mean, that's just the beauty of this technology, how it scales, and really the return on investment of saving lives is just so incredible for this for what we're able to provide.
Are these drones collecting data?
These drones are not. They certainly could collect data, and they are providing us optical awareness and situational awareness of the environment. So it enables us to be able to get the equipment to where it needs to go. But these drones are designed for humanitarian requirements.
All right, well, it's incredible what these drones are doing. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Cameron Chell, CEO of Dragonfly Drones. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us.
Nearly 36 German Shepherds have been rescued from the war in Ukraine. According to our CNN affiliate KFMB, a California trainer traveled alone to Ukraine to rescue the dogs, which are police and military trained K9s. Chris Jimenez raised around $55,000 to charter a plane and bring them all to San Diego County.
Now the dogs need to go through some extensive rehab. They've been, shoved in a car for hours, shoved on a plane. They were in bad condition when I showed up.
Jimenez is trying to find homes for the dogs, but says they must be the right fit. Leaving Shanghai's oppressive COVID-19 lockdown, CNN's David Culver was sealed inside his home for 50 days. Next, he takes us on his one-way journey out of China. China now banning citizens from going overseas for non-essential reasons. It's part of the regime's controversial zero-COVID policy, with much of the city of Shanghai still under a severe lockdown. CNN's David Culver has just left China for the first time in 2.5 years. Here's his story.
Fatigue, frustration, I can't go outside that door, the huge issue. And tired, Juliet. Here we are, morning of leaving Shanghai, in the midst of what's been now 50 days in lockdown.
Leaving Shanghai today is a one-time, one-way journey. Heading out for the first time since mid-March, it all feels so strange.
The few people you see out and about, most of them are head to toe in hazmat suits. As you look on the streets, the ropes are still blocking off a lot of the sidewalks, stores, basically all closed.
With a government-permitted driver, we pass through checkpoints, our documents thoroughly inspected, including a letter from the American Embassy. Many expats like me needing diplomatic letters just to leave our apartments. Once vibrant and rich with energy, Shanghai was forced into an induced coma. The rolling lockdowns began in mid-March. But by April, this city of more than 25 million people was under strict, harsh lockdown, most of us sealed inside our homes. Community COVID tests after test after test, and in between, at-home COVID tests.
I've done quite a few of these.
Early into the lockdown, I packed a go bag for me and for my dog. If I tested positive, I'd likely end up in a government isolation center like this, or worse, like this. Most of us would prefer just to recover in the privacy of our home, but in China's zero COVID world, that is not an option. Shocking scenes of people shouting, "We are starving, we are starving." Heartbreaking stories of people being rejected medical care, some of them later dying. All because hospital workers feared breaking unforgiving zero COVID protocols. Witnessing Shanghai's handling or mishandling reminded me of Wuhan. On January 21st, 2020, we traveled into the then epicenter of what was a mystery illness.
It's the wildlife and seafood market.
Still fresh in our minds, the perseverance of those in Wuhan who lived through the original lockdown. Some losing loved ones to COVID early on.
Just give them a second.
They risked their freedom to share with us their pain-filled stories, furious with their government for not doing more to stop the initial spread. Chinese officials maintain they were transparent from the start. And in recent days, President Xi Jinping has reaffirmed and praised his country's zero COVID efforts, vowing to fight any doubters and critics. Over the past 2 years, we've lived through China's military-like mobilization, rapidly building hospitals, mastering mass testing of tens of millions at one time, designing a sophisticated contact tracing system, likely to be kept and used to watch over every move of 1.4 billion Chinese long after COVID, and also essentially sealing off their borders to the outside world.
Sure, mic check 1, 2, 3.
Wanting to keep on the story, I've not left China since 2019, making this departure a long overdue homecoming visit. Shanghai's Pudong International Airport, once among the busiest in the world, is now a lonely experience. Only 2 international flights slated to leave on this day. On the floor, sleeping bags and trash, where stranded travelers have camped out. They wait here for days or weeks for a flight out. Outside on the tarmac, strict COVID protocols and sanitation in place. Ground crews spraying each other with disinfectant. The weeks of built-up anxiety-induced adrenaline begin to ease. Boarding the near-empty plane, it finally starts to feel real.
About to take off.
The disorder, despair, the chaos, the anger, the exhaustion, all of it feels so distant now. With a sigh of relief and a bit of survivor's guilt, leaving behind a country amidst almost unprecedented changes, I wonder if China's tightening zero COVID restrictions, coupled with rising tensions with the West, will keep its shuttered doors from ever reopening. David Culver, CNN, back home.
Such a good story in the first person. That's it for the show. I'm Allison Cossack. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Allison Cossack. Connect the World is next. I'll see you soon.
The US has now reached a dreaded milestone, 1 million deaths from COVID. For a comparison, that's more than the total number of casualties the US has had in all the wars you see here combined. To help prevent more human tragedy caused by COVID, the US and the European Union say that they'll step up their efforts to provide COVID vaccines and treatments globally. US President Joe Biden and European Commission leader Ursula von der Leyen are pledging to increase vaccine equity and improve supply chains. More commitments were also made at a virtual global COVID summit hosted by Mr. Biden. He says there's no time to wait when it comes to preparations for the next variant or the next pandemic.
Now is the time for us to act, all of us together. We all must do more. We must honor those we have lost by doing everything we can to prevent as many deaths as possible.
Well, China is continuing to struggle in its mission to stop the spread of COVID for weeks. CNN's David Culver was stuck in Shanghai's lockdown, bringing us reporting on the frustrated residents who were banned from leaving their homes. He was finally able to leave this week, and here's the story of his journey out.
Leaving Shanghai today is a one-time, one-way journey. I've not had this much freedom in 50 days.
And here we go, off to the airport.
Heading out for the first time since mid-March, it all feels so strange.
The few people you see out and about, most of them are head to toe in hazmat suits. As you look on the streets, the ropes are still blocking off a lot of the sidewalks, stores, basically all closed.
With a government-permitted driver, we pass through checkpoints, our documents thoroughly inspected, including a letter from the American Embassy. Many expats like me needing diplomatic letters just to leave our apartments. Once vibrant and rich with energy, Shanghai was forced into an induced coma. The rolling lockdowns began in mid-March, but by April, this city of more than 25 million people was under strict, harsh lockdown, most of us sealed inside our homes. Community COVID tests after test after test, and in between, at-home COVID tests.
I've done quite a few of these.
Early into the lockdown, I packed a go bag for me and for my dog. If I tested positive, I'd likely end up in a government isolation center like this, or worse, like this. Most of us would prefer just to recover in the privacy of our home, but in China's zero COVID world, that is not an option. Shocking scenes of people shouting, "We are starving, we are starving." Heartbreaking stories of people being rejected medical care, some of them later dying, all because hospital workers feared breaking unforgiving zero COVID protocols. Witnessing Shanghai's handling or mishandling reminded me of Wuhan. On January 21st, 2020, we traveled into the then epicenter of what was a mystery illness.
It's the wildlife and seafood market.
Still fresh in our minds, the perseverance of those in Wuhan who lived through the original lockdown. Some losing loved ones to COVID early on.
Just give them a second.
They risked their freedom to share with us their pain-filled stories, furious with their government for not doing more to stop the initial spread. Chinese officials maintain they were transparent from the start. And in recent days, President Xi Jinping has reaffirmed and praised his country's zero COVID efforts, vowing to fight any doubters and critics. Over the past 2 years, we've lived through China's military-like mobilization, rapidly building hospitals, mastering mass testing of tens of millions at one time, designing a sophisticated contact tracing system, essentially sealing off their borders to the outside world.
Sure, mic check 1, 2, 3.
Wanting to keep on the story, I've not left China since 2019, making this departure a long overdue homecoming visit. Shanghai's Pudong International Airport, once among the busiest in the world, is now a lonely experience. On the departures board, only 2 international flights slated to leave on this day. On the floor, sleeping bags and trash, where stranded travelers have camped out. They wait here for days or weeks for a flight out. Outside on the tarmac, strict COVID protocols and sanitation in place. Ground crews spraying each other with disinfectant. Boarding the near empty plane, it finally starts to feel real.
About to take off.
The disorder, despair, the chaos, the anger, the exhaustion, all of it feels so distant now. With a sigh of relief and a bit of survivor's guilt, leaving behind a country amidst almost unprecedented changes, I wonder if China's tightening zero-COVID restrictions, coupled with rising tensions with the West, will keep its shuttered doors from ever reopening. David Culver, CNN, back home.
Well, glad to see David Culver back home. What an incredible journey. Now, right next door, North Korea faces an explosive COVID-19 outbreak. It's reporting its first COVID death. A day after announcing its first case, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visited the epidemic prevention headquarters Thursday in Pyongyang. The same day, he ordered a nationwide lockdown. And since late April, North Korean state media say more than 350,000 cases of unexplained fevers have been identified. Let's bring in Will Ripley, who over the years has gotten rare access to cover stories from inside North Korea. He joins us now live from Taipei in Taiwan. I tell you, when you hear 350,000 unexplained, fever cases, it makes you wonder if this is COVID related. It's interesting that we're getting some information, but what can we read into it?
I mean, I'm really heartsick for the people who I've worked with inside North Korea for the last 8 years. Haven't been able to make contact since this latest news broke, but I can imagine the conditions are pretty bad when you're talking about a lockdown situation. There was a Chinese state media reporter locked down in his apartment. He said he had enough food to last him for a week, and after that he had no idea because the government hadn't reached out with any information about a plan. And he is an expat. He is one of the privileged that has plenty to eat, unlike most people, certainly outside of the North Korean capital, Pyongyang. So you think about them potentially being hungry. You think about the fact they have no herd immunity, essentially, because they have hermetically sealed their borders for the last 2 years, and that's stopped a lot of trade, including food coming in. Most NGOs and foreign diplomats left the country a long time ago because North Korea doesn't have banks. Foreigners have to hand carry in suitcases of cash, and when the cash ran out, people had to pack up and leave. So North Korea is arguably more isolated now, at a huge risk, given that there's no herd immunity for this highly contagious Omicron variant. They don't even have enough testing equipment to necessarily confirm which variant it is, and they certainly don't have ventilators and the type of medical equipment that would be needed to treat severe cases, of which there are millions of people who would be at risk for a severe case. So it's a really, really, obviously we're not in there. This is all just kind of thinking about all of these factors coming together, and it could be really, really just awful, awful.
And your contacts on the ground telling you that this could be a dire situation. They're rejecting the offers of vaccines from neighbors. We know that international community has offered a helping hand and mostly said no. And then I wonder, in terms of where the possible outbreak could be, and then the question is, how did it even get in? There's so many questions around this.
The North Koreans apparently were offered vaccines made in China, which they rejected. They wanted something like the Pfizer vaccine that that was proven to be effective and not have side effects. So as a result, the North Korean leadership essentially turned down millions of doses of vaccines, any of which would have been better than no vaccines. And so you have North Korea and Eritrea as the two countries in the world that have yet to administer vaccines to their general population. I would imagine that the elite, meaning the high-level North Koreans, have been vaccinated, although we saw in North Korean state media Kim Jong-un wearing a mask for the very first time that we've seen him. The North Koreans, even though they had their borders sealed, Eleni, they had a military parade on the 25th of April with thousands of people not wearing masks. Given that there was an Omicron outbreak just across the border in China, you have to wonder if they're now wondering if that large event was a mistake, if that could have been the super spreader event that started all of those cases detected in Pyongyang.
Well, thank you very much for that insight, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this story again. Thank you so much. Now, coming up after the break, Elon Musk presses the pause button while the world's richest man is putting his blockbuster deal to buy Twitter on hold. Elon Musk's epic $44 billion deal to buy Twitter is now on hold. Earlier today, the billionaire broke the news with a tweet, of course, saying, Twitter deal temporarily on hold pending details supporting calculation that spam/fake accounts do indeed represent less than 5% of users. CNN business correspondent Rahel Solomon joins us now live from New York. Rahel, what a day. I mean, honestly, Elon Musk is just moving the markets constantly. He's changing stock prices just by a mere tweet, and so much is at stake. What is he trying to achieve here?
Eleni, what a morning. Yeah, and the tweet that you just mentioned, that actually is just part one, act one of the drama we saw unfold this morning. Act two was a follow-up tweet that came a few hours later, just before 8 a.m. Eastern. Elon Musk tweeting, still committed to acquisition. This news, these tweets really sending Twitter shares pre-market into a bit of a tailspin. They plunged at one point more than 20%. Dan Ives, an analyst who covers this stock very closely, telling me this morning over the phone, this is a black eye for Musk, no matter how you slice it. Even for his most loyal followers, this is a black eye. This tweeting of a deal is just really improper. That said, he said he also is really skeptical about that Reuters article, the reasoning of the spam bots being the reason you're walking away from this deal, saying that that's essentially been known sort of in the community for quite some time. Also saying it's like saying the dog ate your homework. He's not buying it. So, Eleni, at this point, folks are starting to question, was this just a ploy, a strategy to perhaps renegotiate a better deal? Of course, his offer was $54.20 a share. Last I checked, shares were closer to $40 a share. Or is this a ploy to just walk away from the deal? And if he does, there will likely be a $1 billion breakup fee.
I was just about to say that. I mean, basically, he's just changing the PE ratio as he chooses through a mere tweet. I mean, this is what's becoming very interesting, and he's trying to justify perhaps paying a cheaper price. But importantly here, we've been questioning his real commitment to get into Twitter. So I think we'll be watching this one very closely. Rahel Solomon, really good to see you as always. Thanks so much. All right, tonight for our parting shots. We pay tribute to the UAE's late president, Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who passed away today at age 73. Sheikh Khalifa came to power in 2004 when his father, UAE founder Sheikh Zayed Al Nahyan, died. During his tenure, he modernized the country, transforming the UAE into the regional powerhouse that it is today. An avid sports fan, Sheikh Khalifa helped his brother acquire Manchester City Football Club, and he inspired the name of the world's tallest building, Burj Khalifa. After suffering a stroke in 2014, Sheikh Khalifa stepped away from most of his duties. His brother, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed, has widely been seen as the UAE's de facto ruler ever since. Tweeting about his passing, Sheikh Mohammed said, Khalifa bin Zayed, my brother, my mentor, and my teacher, may God have mercy on you and bless you into his heavens. Well, thank you so very much for joining us. That was Connect the World. CNN's coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues after the short break. I'm Eleni Jarkas. Have a fantastic weekend.
Hello everyone, I'm Zain Asher in New York, and this is One World. Russia is accelerating its attacks in eastern Ukraine as some troops pull back from the Kharkiv region and others advance towards major cities in the Donbass. British military officials says that Moscow is focused on capturing Sloviansk and Kramatorsk with the goal of surrounding Ukrainian troops and cutting off their supply lines. Intense fighting is taking place along the front lines in the Luhansk region, and after weeks of relentless shelling, Ukrainian resistance appears all but over in the city of Rubizin. But further north, Moscow is losing ground, withdrawing forces from around Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. In a move meant to slow down Kyiv's counteroffensive, Russian units apparently destroyed several bridges in the area. Ukraine's defense ministry, meanwhile, is preparing for a drawn-out conflict, one that President Volodymyr Zelensky says will end victoriously.
Russia's strategic defeat is already obvious to everyone in the world and even to those who still continue to communicate with them. Russia simply lacks courage to admit it so far. They are cowards, and they are trying to hide the truth behind missile, air, and artillery strikes. Therefore, our task is to fight until we achieve our goals in this war, free our land, our people, and reliably ensure our security.
The world has watched in horror as Russian artillery has devastated Ukrainian cities and Ukrainian lives, seemingly with impunity. The US and the international community have accused Russia of war crimes in Ukraine, but what has been difficult is tying specific generals to specific crimes, the key to actually carrying out war crimes prosecutions. In Kharkiv, CNN has seen the aftermath of attacks targeting civilians using indiscriminate cluster munitions, a war crime. In a 2-month-long investigation, CNN can reveal the commander responsible for these attacks and the string of atrocities he has committed, not just in Russia's latest war in Ukraine, but also in the 2014 war in the Donbass and in Syria as well. Chief International Investigative Correspondent Nemral Bagir has this exclusive report. We want to warn you, though, that you might find some of the images in her report disturbing.
A devastation of civilian homes and lives. Throughout the last 2 months, we have witnessed atrocities in Ukraine.
More mortar strikes, very, very close. They want us to start moving.
While we know these are Russian actions, it's been difficult to draw a direct line from individual atrocities to a specific Russian commander, until now. CNN can exclusively reveal that this man, Colonel General Alexander Zhuravlov, commander of the Western Military District, is the commander responsible for this. Munitions targeting civilians in the city of Kharkiv, East Ukraine. A war crime under international law.
You can see more artillery rockets apparently be firing from Russian territory towards the territory, I would say, around Kharkiv. I don't know if you can hear this right now.
This is the start of the war. CNN's senior international correspondent Fred Pleitgen witnessed artillery being fired from inside Russia, within Zhuravlov's district, towards the city of Kharkiv. Sam Kiley was in Kharkiv and could hear the shelling moments later.
Could feel the concussion against the glass.
We soon learned from experts these were Smerch rockets. Built in the early 80s at the end of the Soviet era, this multiple rocket launch system, scorching the earth as it fires, is a pride and joy of Russia's armaments, as seen here in this propaganda documentary. This is what they're capable of delivering. Cluster bombs. One Smerch rocket releasing many smaller explosives, scattering bombs, amplifying the devastation. These attacks, captured on social media both in Kharkiv and both from the same day, are a clear example of their indiscriminate nature. When used in this fashion against civilians, it's considered a war crime. The use of Smerch rockets are key in our findings of who is responsible, because they are unique to one unit here, one commander. After months of forensic work, we can reveal the trail of evidence leading to Zhuravlov. Using social media videos to guide us, we return to some of the scenes of the attacks, focusing on February 27th, when 3 civilian targets were hit and 8 more on February 28th. We start in the Pavlovo Pole neighborhood of Kharkiv. This is shrapnel from those missiles that fell on our neighborhood, Lilia tells us. This shrapnel was found in one of the rooms. Lilia takes us to see a Smerch rocket that fell 200 yards from her apartment block in this once affluent area. I remember the whistling sound of the missiles. I know that the missiles were flying and that they were accompanied by fighter planes or drones.
You can see the hole that it came through. You can see the way that the rocket buckled when it hit the car. You can also very clearly see that this is a Smerch.
It's not the only rocket coming from this direction on this day. Less than a half-mile down the road, another hit.
Helping to situate us, this kiosk, that water cooler, they're key landmarks. The bodies landed here down this road. Those blue doors you see, that's where the cluster munition shrapnel embedded.
This video filmed moments after the attack where 4 people, including a child, were killed. Another Smerch launching cluster bombs. We know this because one of the unexploded bombs was found only 280 yards away. Notice the date, 2019. Russia stopped selling arms to Ukraine in 2014. This confirms this is a Russian cluster bomb. 1.5 miles away, another strike, more suffering, and no sign of any legitimate military targets. People were queuing for food, and then something just hit. People started running here, she says. This is the exact moment of impact. Look at it again. Frame by frame, you can see the scale of the rocket and proximity to innocent civilians. We are here in Kharkiv. Notice the 5 hits along this line from the 28th. They're pretty much in a line, apart from 3 here, which line up with the hits from February 27th. We can trace these lines 24 miles to a point of convergence here, across the border in Russia, well within the range of a Smerch rocket, where we have a satellite image from the 27th showing the launching position. Notice the plume of smoke and the telltale burn marks of a Smerch launch, here, here, and here. In collaboration with the Center for Information Resilience, we can also tell you who is firing from this position. The 79th Russian Artillery Brigade, part of the Western Military District, which borders Ukraine and is under the command of Zhuravlov. According to open-source information reviewed by CNN, military experts and intelligence sources, they are the only unit in this district equipped to launch Smerch rockets. And only the commander has the authority to order the 79th Artillery Brigade to launch the rockets. And this was just in the 2 days that we analyzed. These stills, shared exclusively with CNN by Kharkiv prosecutors, show the Russian armaments raining death, among them many Smerch remnants. Experts say this is among the heaviest bombardments in recent history. Zhuravlov is no stranger to these brutal tactics. Atrocities targeting civilians. They're very similar to what we saw in Syria in 2016. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that Zhuravlov also led Russian troops during the siege of Aleppo. He is the architect of the devastation you see here. For leveling Aleppo, he was awarded the highest honor granted to Russian officers, Hero of the Russian Federation. Yet Syrians have documented his war crimes.
Russian?
Despite the direct line from the impunity the world afforded Russia in Syria to the atrocities suffered by civilians here today, the question remains, what will the world do to stop this cycle? Ni'am al-Bagher, CNN, Kharkiv.
We've asked the Russian Ministry of Defense for comment, as well as the Kremlin, but we have yet to receive a response. CNN shared with the U.S. State Department are findings noting the lack of action taken against Colonel General Zhevlyov and other Russian generals as well. They would not comment on these specific acts or any other information reviewed, but they said they continue to track and assess war crimes and reports of ongoing violence and human rights abuses as well. Ukraine has launched its first war crimes trial against a member of Russia's military. Prosecutors are accusing this 21-year-old soldier of killing an unarmed civilian in northeastern Ukraine. It's just one of many atrocities Russia has been accused of committing since it launched this war. If found guilty, the soldier could face up to life in prison. CNN's Melissa Bell joins us live now from Kyiv. So this war crimes trial is certainly unprecedented. What more do we know about the case against this 21-year-old member of the Russian military?
This was just a preliminary trial where essentially the procedure was explained to him. He appeared in the dock looking very young. I think that's what struck all of us in the court. Now, this is, as we've just been hearing, one of many alleged war crimes. I think one of the particularities of this war, as you've just been covering, Zain, is the number, the sheer number. You'll remember that since the early days of April, when the Russians retreated from a fair number of towns, including Bucha and towns around Kyiv, it was the scale of the horror and the atrocities allegedly committed by them that was unveiled to the entire world. As a result, the eyes of the world have been here, as have their forensics team, and that has really helped Ukrainian prosecutors to build their cases. Now, there's also, of course, the determination of one woman, that is Ukraine's chief prosecutor, who believes that it is essential that the prosecution of these war crimes in Ukrainian civilian courts, which is what started today, should begin even before the war ends, because it is about ensuring for the first time, possibly in the history of warfare, that there is no sense of impunity amongst the ranks of those trying to invade. Have a listen.
These proceedings now can save lives of our Ukrainian civilians on the south and eastern part of Ukraine, because these perpetrators who are now fighting will see that we will find all of them, we will identify all of them, and we will start to prosecute all of them.
Now, there's the question, of course, of whether a trial can be fair and independent and just in the context of a war. Now, both the prosecutor that you just heard from, but also Vadim Shishimarin's defense lawyer, who spoke to us just after that preliminary hearing this morning here in Kyiv, said that they have full faith in the Ukrainian judiciary, in its independence, in its transparency, and that it was being held according to the facts. That's what the prosecutor told us, many of them uncovered by those foreign forensic teams involved, that the transparency would be such that the whole world could follow proceedings, and there were a lot of cameras in that courtroom this morning. But there is, of course, the question of the emotion, and that's going to be some of the pressure, I think, Zain, that's going to be brought to bear on this trial and the ones that are going to follow in swift order, because there are many more planned by the country's prosecutor over the coming days and weeks. This is a war that continues, and of course, for all the Ukrainians in that courtroom today, or for anyone watching, it will bring an enormous amount of emotion. Now, as we left the courtroom, we were able to speak to the courtroom's translator, a Ukrainian woman who throughout the proceedings had been explaining to Shishimarin what was going on. And we said to her, how did you feel about him? And she said, look, I felt no hatred. Do remember that the tears of Russian mothers are just as salty as ours.
Gosh, what a line. All right, Melissa Bell, live for us there. Thank you so much. In southern Ukraine, officials say there's growing humanitarian crisis in the Russian-occupied region of Kherson. Further east in the war-ravaged Mariupol, the situation is even more dire, with civilians desperately trying to get out and the most basic of necessities all but gone. And now, renewed violence. A mayoral advisor says that Russian forces are again bombarding the Azovstal steel plant. Talks are going on to get wounded Ukrainian soldiers out of the complex. All right, still to come here, a solemn procession in Jerusalem takes a violent turn as Israeli police beat mourners at the funeral of a prominent Palestinian-American journalist. And a new report says that global warming contributed to South Africa's recent flooding disaster, and it warns the risk of extreme weather is exploding. We'll have details next. The President of the United Arab Emirates has died at the age of 73. Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan's role had been largely ceremonial since he suffered a stroke in 2014, but his modernization drive helped transform his country into a regional powerhouse. Becky Anderson looks at his legacy.
When Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan was born in 1948, the United Arab Emirates didn't even exist as a nation. This was a land where many earned their living by fishing or pearling. But his family was instrumental in transforming this into one of the world's largest oil producers. By the time the UAE, a federation of 7 states, was created in 1971, Sheikh Khalifa was the crown prince of the wealthiest state and country's capital, Abu Dhabi. He took over the presidency in 2004 after the death of his father, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan, the nation's founder. Like his father, he wished to modernize his country, shaping it into a haven of stability in a volatile neighborhood. At home, he invested in the country's armed forces and developed its lucrative energy sector. His success spelled out on Dubai's skyline, where one of the tallest buildings in the world, the Burj Khalifa, took on its leader's name after the government bailed Dubai out of its debt woes in 2009. Overseas, he solidified traditional alliances with countries like the UK while boosting trade ties with new partners. Under his leadership, the UAE invested its enormous wealth in globally recognized airlines, prized assets, sporting powerhouses, and major global events that have collectively put the country on the map, turning it into a global tourist destination. By the early 2010s, deteriorating health increasingly kept Sheikh Khalifa out of the public limelight. He underwent surgery after suffering a stroke in 2014. But his modernising vision for the country has carried on under the leadership of his half-brother and Abu Dhabi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Zayed. It's taken bold diplomatic steps, such as establishing relations with Israel through the Abraham Accords, and hosting the first ever papal visit to the Arabian Peninsula, positioning itself as a tolerant Middle Eastern society, all the while delicately balancing relations with Western and non-Western powers alike. It's used its military might to project power, sometimes controversially, in places like Yemen, and it's been diversifying its economy to cut its reliance on oil revenues, investing in renewable and nuclear energy, while taking steps such as allowing for complete foreign ownership of companies and introducing a golden visa program to maintain its position as an attractive destination for foreign investment and talent. It's even entered the space race, becoming the first ever Arab country to send a mission to Mars, aptly named Hope. It is, by all accounts, a country transformed. And that is how Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan leaves it to his successor.
That was Becky Anderson reporting there. All right, Israeli police in Jerusalem beat and shoved mourners ahead of the funeral of 51-year-old Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. I want you to look at this video. It shows officers using batons to hit the crowd as it carried the coffin of the prominent Palestinian-American journalist. So much commotion, so much tension there. Israeli police said they were forced to act because they say that some people were throwing stones. The pallbearers were pushed back, and at one point, take a look at this, the coffin almost slips out of their hands. It turns vertically, almost falling to the ground completely. I want to get more now from Atika Schubert, who is live for us in Jerusalem. So Atika, this is being so closely watched. Even before this moment, there was already so much outrage, so much anger, and seems like that only, of course, add fuel to the fire.
Yeah, I think a lot of this happened really because Israeli police were trying to contain a lot of that outpouring of anger and grief. They had specifically asked the Abu Akleh family to hold a small funeral and not to show Palestinian flags. They also said they would prevent a walking funeral procession from the hospital. And so we were there at St. Joseph's Hospital. What we saw was that the family and mourners that were gathered there insisted on having this walking funeral procession and walked it to the hospital gates. They were immediately blocked by Israeli riot police, who then not only blocked them, but charged into the hospital grounds with batons. And as you see in that video, hitting some of the pallbearers with the coffin nearly falling out of their hands. Now, Israeli police have also provided their own video saying that they were reacting to stone throwing by the mourners. Now, I was there. I did not see any stones. I did see, however, plastic bottles being hurled at police, plastic flags. And it was a chaotic, tense situation. Tear gas appeared to have been used. Stun grenades were certainly used. I heard them go off. And it really was just adding to the intenseness of the situation, this tense situation on the ground. Once the family decided that it would carry on with the funeral procession with a car, bringing the coffin to the church by car, things calmed down considerably. And thousands of people actually came out to the funeral in the Old City to walk the coffin from the Greek Catholic Church there to the Mount Zion Cemetery where she was buried. And it was an incredibly emotional ceremony with thousands of people there singing, waving the Palestinian flag. And I think it's important to remember that Shireen Abu Akleh wasn't just a veteran journalist. For many Palestinians, she was almost like a member of the family, appearing in their living rooms every night, reporting on their daily struggles. And I think that's why it was such an emotional and close issue for so many Palestinians.
Yeah, thousands of people attended her funeral. I mean, she was awarded the Star of Jerusalem, the highest honors that you can actually get from a Palestinian president. Mahmoud Abbas awarded her those honors. Atika Schubert, live for us there. Thank you so much. When 435 people died in catastrophic flooding in South Africa last month, people were horrified, shocked, and outraged. Now, an alarming new report blames climate change and warns such disasters will be far more common in the future. The analysis is from the World Weather Attribution Project. It says extreme weather events like this can now be expected every 20 years. Dave McKenzie joins us live now from Johannesburg with a closer look. So the fact that, this is caused by climate change, and also the fact that it will likely be much more frequent, at least every 20 years, is extremely frightening when you consider the fact that these floods killed more than 400 people. Walk us through what happened, David.
Well, it was this intense flooding in the eastern part of South Africa here, where they had, Zane, several hours of rain dumping down more than a month's worth of rain. And this really hammers home, this study hammers home the fact that it was bad, and it was made worse already because of the climate crisis, where we are now in terms of warming of the planet. More rain, more intensity, and as you say, it could happen more frequently. Now, that 20-year window doesn't necessarily sound like a short amount of time. The earlier estimations in pre-industrial age would have been every 40 years, so you're halving that time. Now, this is just based on the current level of warming in the planet. If you accelerate the warming, which is likely to happen, that will happen even more frequently and make even more devastation on these communities that can barely cope with the rains on an average year. Zane?
Because this particular disaster, these particular floods, actually really exposed some of South Africa's structural inequalities. The communities that were marginalized, that were sort of more remote, seem to be the ones that were disproportionately affected by this particular weather event. So what can South Africa do to prepare itself for the fact that these types of disasters may indeed become more frequent, as you point out?
Zane, I think you bring up a really, really important point that I've heard from scientists time and time again in the last 6 months or so. We've been looking into these issues. Yes, it was those most vulnerable who were affected the most. People in informal housing near to those riverbanks, people without the structural, both physical structure and also the support of the government that they deserve. Now, if you take that and put it on a global scale, it's not just South Africa, but the whole of all the regions which will be adversely affected by climate change, which is the entire planet. But there are areas that will be hit even harder. Part of it will be here in southern Africa, in the eastern part of the country, more rain. In the northwestern part of the country and in Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, more frequent droughts. Similarly, in other parts of the world, it's those areas where people can mitigate it, meaning prevent the worst effects of climate change, the least. And so that divide between the rich and the poor, even when it comes to climate change, or especially with climate change, will be that much worse. And these countries like South Africa didn't cause climate change, and yet citizens like those washed away by these floods will be those who suffer from it a lot more than industrialized nations, traditionally industrialized nations. So I think a lot needs to be done in discussions in terms of mitigating those impacts of climate change, and of course doing more to stop the climate crisis, which is really going to put all of us in some kind of crisis in the decades ahead.
Right, and the burden shouldn't just be on South Africa, it's incumbent upon all of us to do our part. All right, Dave McKenzie, live for us there. Thank you so much. All right, still to come here on One World, the death and destruction across Ukraine is doing unthinkable damage to the nation's children. UNICEF calls it a child's rights crisis. We'll discuss just ahead. Hello and welcome back to One World. Last month, almost 100 children were killed in Ukraine as a result of Russia's invasion. That's according to UNICEF. We're told the true numbers are likely much, much higher. UNICEF is thoroughly documenting the damage being done to children. I want you to look at this. UNICEF calls it a child protection and child rights crisis. Millions of children across Ukraine have been displaced, their lives almost instantly disrupted. No safe spaces have been spared. Bombs have hit their homes, their daycares, their schools. Just as their small bodies are under attack, so are the developing minds. UNICEF's Deputy Executive Director says that children need an end to this war because their future hangs in the balance. Time now for the exchange and more details about the horror that many Ukrainian children are experiencing right now. With me in New York is Joe English, UNICEF's emergency communication specialist who has worked on crises involving children around the world. Joe, thank you so much for being with us on such an important story. Almost 3 months of war. We know that at least on paper, the official figures will tell us that about 100 Ukrainian children have died in this war. Of course, you and I both know the number is likely much, much higher. Many more children have been injured. Millions of children displaced in all of this. I understand that you just came back from a trip to Ukraine. Explain to our audience who might not understand, what exactly are children on the ground in that country experiencing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Zain. It's honestly hard to put into words the impact that this war is having on children. You know, children are being caught up directly in the violence. You know, we speak to the number of children who are killed and injured. They're having to flee their homes, often in the middle of the night when the bombardments are coming closer. And all of this has a psychological impact, creates a trauma for children and indeed for parents who are their caregivers, who are the ones who are having to hold their hand and tell them that things are going to be okay when honestly they do not know that if that is the case. And so, you know, we now talk about 6 million refugees, 8 million displaced within the country. You know, that's 15 million people almost who have been forced from their homes. That's almost the equivalent of the entire population of Greater London. And for many of them, it's not just that they've been forced from their homes, they have no homes left to go back to. Now, the good news is as fighting has receded in some areas, people are able to go back to their homes. But the dangers then, you know, there could be unexploded ordnance, there could be landmines. And so it just reverberates.
So what is, I mean, you touched on the psychological impact on children. Explain to us what it actually is. What does it mean, and what is the impact psychologically of a child seeing their playground reduced to rubble, seeing mum and dad crying in the corner because a loved one has passed away, walking down the street and seeing 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 dead bodies? Explain to us the trauma that is involved here.
Yeah, you know, I think it is every single child, I think, in Ukraine, one way or another, has been touched by this war. And for kids who see the worst of it, you know, this is going to have a profound impact on them. Now, this manifests itself in different ways. Some children may retreat into themselves, you know, be very shy and fearful. Some may become aggressive and may lash out. And so there's no sort of one size fits all for this. But what every single one of these children will need is support, is a safe space to begin to unpack these traumas, these mental wounds. Some of them, they will need dedicated support, expert support, psychosocial workers, counsellors to be able to begin to rebuild their lives.
And we know that some, just in terms of education, many children do have access to online learning in Ukraine. However, you know, explain the motivation to even learn, or the ability or the capacity to even learn when you're going through that much trauma.
Yeah, you know, it's really difficult. UNICEF's working with the Ministry of Education and Science to do all we can to be reaching kids with education, whether that's online. You know, for children who've been living in subway stations in Kharkiv, we've been providing in-person education. But as you say, you know, whilst the war continues, it's going to be very difficult for children to be able to really engage with this in a meaningful way. But we know that school can provide that safe space. It can provide a way for children to begin to feel a semblance of normality and begin to unpack these wounds. But, you know, more needs to be done, and ultimately children need a ceasefire. They need an end to the fighting.
Yeah, because even the kids who are able to go to school every day, you know, via online classes, it's still going to be, from time to time, certainly interrupted. And so what does that do to an entire generation of children?
Well, this is it, and we can't forget that for many of these children, and children all around the world, they've been dealing with 2 years of disruption to their schooling, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, schools reopened this year, and this was a positive step, and then in February, obviously, everything shut down. So it's key to get kids back in, because ultimately, once the fighting does end, you know, these kids need to be equipped with the skills that they need to be able to build a future and to rebuild their country.
You know, I know that a lot of viewers are going to be moved by this, by hearing about what children in Ukraine are going through. What can people all around the world who are listening to this right now and who are moved to help, what can they do?
Yeah, completely. You know, as you say, I was in Poland and I was in Ukraine just last month, and I've seen the impact of UNICEF's work, and we are delivering education supplies. We are delivering critically needed surgical kits all across the country. Wherever we have safe, unfettered access, we're providing support to families who've been able to escape encircled cities like Mariupol. So every donation, you know, unicef.org, go there. If you donate, it all makes a huge difference. And for children who are affected by this, you know, they need all the support they can get.
Right, Joe English, live for us. Thank you so much for being on the programme.
Thanks so much, Zane.
The Eurovision Song Contest gets underway Saturday in Italy. One contestant in particular is getting all the attention, Ukraine's Kalush Orchestra. The folk rap group are the favourites to win, but as Bianca Nobilo reports, their music is about more than just winning a contest.
For Ukraine, Eurovision has always been very important, and especially now in this period of war, it has become even more important.
While his countrymen fight on the front lines, Ola, aged 26, the lead singer of the Kalush Orchestra, was given special permission to leave the Ukrainian battlefield for the Eurovision stage.
Of course, this is a huge responsibility and stress, especially now with the missiles flying around. A lot of my relatives are in danger, and this causes a lot of pressure.
One of the core members of the group chose to stay behind and fight, while the country's commentator for Eurovision set up a studio in a bomb shelter. The song Stefania, written before the war began about his mother, has now taken on greater significance.
It is true that this song has become very popular and has been perceived as an actual anthem of the war, but I would rather it is called the anthem of our victory.
Fusing Ukrainian folk elements with rap, the group's performance combines past with present at a time when the country's future is unknown.
And what would a victory for Ukraine in the Eurovision Song Contest mean for your country?
Now for Ukraine, it is important to have victory in all different aspects, and a victory in this Eurovision contest would raise the spirits of the Ukrainian people a lot. So I hope to bring good news for Ukraine, because there hasn't been any good news for a long time.
Eurovision, known for its zany costumes and choreography, was born from a desire to promote cooperation between European countries in the years following the Second World War. Viewed by almost 200 million people, it's an exercise in soft power. Votes usually align with the country's alliances and sympathies, with neighbouring countries and blocs often giving points to each other. Historically, Belarus and Russia have voted for one another, but this year they've been banned from competing.
Russia has been disqualified from lots of events. The world shows that it is on our side, that they are condemning the invasion of one country into another country in the centre of Europe.
From a little girl belting out "Let It Go" in a bunker, to trapped soldiers singing inside the besieged Azovstal steel plant as the Russians shelled it, defiance dressed in song has rung out through the chaos of this war. A fight to which Ola and his band will soon return.
As soon as Eurovision ends, we will go back to Ukraine. If it comes to that, all of us will go and defend our country until the very end.
Bianca Nobilo, CNN, London.
And lastly this hour, Twitter stock fell a bit after Elon Musk announced his bid to buy the company is actually on hold. He explained in a tweet, of course, he's concerned about Twitter's latest financial report, which says fewer than 5% of accounts are spam or fake accounts. He says he's waiting for details to support that estimate. Twitter's had a spam problem for many years, so it's not clear why Elon Musk would back away from the $44 billion deal because of that latest number. Also, if Musk does abandon it, he'll owe a $1 billion breakup fee. All right, thank you so much for watching One World. I'm Zain Asher. Inside Africa's up next. You're watching CNN.
we're problem solvers by nature. And I feel that this has enhanced the human's presence in life over the generations. I think to do this, I recommend highly a design thinking process. Design thinking, the mindset.
Architecture school graduate Arnold Mugaga founded the design-based social enterprise Zetu Africa in 2019.
Zetu is Swahili for ours, ours Africa. This is the entire spirit of Zetu, a sense of ownership first. And so we owned into the idea that, okay, over 95 million African school children have no place to sit or write during class. Why? Can we build something that is sustainably, that can sustainably serve them, that's eco-friendly and affordable and context-specific?
Arnold and his team came up with the idea of a seat pack, a lightweight school bag with a fold-out bamboo stool.
The idea is that the child gets to class, they take their school bag off, they take out the bamboo portion of their school bag, and they have a seat. They take their school bag, they open it out. Each school bag comes with a blackboard writing surface.
The award-winning design is made in their workshop, located in a suburb of the country's capital, Kampala.
We learn and fail in this space, and our production begins here. So the designing, the drafting, the cutting of the material, and then we ship it off into the making.
Zetu also makes ordinary backpacks, and sales help fund the production of seat packs.
I have spent time around people that have some experience building things from scratch. And so their experience starts to rub off of you. And you notice that, well, as opposed to sitting and waiting for resources, you become very resourceful. And you figure it out where you are, how you are at that time. And say, well, how do I move forward? Even if I don't have X yet or Y yet, how do I move forward? And I think this has helped me trust in myself and our process much, much more.
COVID-19 was a test for Arnold and Zetu, along with many other businesses, who had to rethink their supply chains.
And so we looked at home, said, well, how would we build a seat pack completely in Uganda? This is where the bamboo came in. And so we sampled with different farmers. We tested different designs, and we arrived at a very sweet spot. Before the pandemic, to make a seat pack, we required $25 per unit. This was a school bag writing surface and the aluminium chair. After the pandemic, we required $18 to make the seat pack. And it was fascinating to realize that the obstacle is actually the way.
The seat's bamboo legs are processed off-site.
So this fine bamboo comes from the north of Uganda, Moyo district. It's very tough, and it's harvested 3 to 5 years and treated there, and then we have it shipped here, and it goes through a process that's overseen by Sunday, and it arrives at that, a very well-treated, smooth surface bamboo piece.
Arnold says they've produced 1,200 seats so far, which are being tested in schools across the country, including the northern town of Yumbe.
What we are going to show you is the 12th time we are refining this concept.
And every time the team works with a new district, Arnold gets feedback from local government and school children.
I think it is a very good innovation in the sense that it helps to address the needs of our young people who go to school, and it is more relevant to their local context. And therefore, I think that if it is adapted and impressed, one, it is going to motivate them to be in school and also attend regularly. And I believe since it is a pack that they move with, it is more sustainable, and issues of ownership can easily be addressed.
What I love most about what I do is the repetitive feedback and an improvement cycle. So we go through a very tight loop. We always build, and then we apply, and then, okay, tell us what you like. And just hearing that, and then thinking, well, what can we do about it? And then incorporating what your wishes are, or what the user's wishes are into the product, and then seeing the reaction into the improvement. This is the absolute thrill for me. For most of the team, I must say, who enjoy this process.
One adaptation to SeatPack's design is a pouch for sanitary products.
This is going to increase retention in schools because no girls will be absenting themselves from school because they are in their period. They will be able to carry their extra material so that they can use it during their period and also safely carry it back home.
The team is donating 100 SeatPacks to 2 local primary schools here, with Arnold saying his aim is to deliver 10,000 countrywide in 2022 and 10 million by 2030.
With Zetu, we hope to make a very clear statement that the classroom can be wherever the child is. Our intent to making 3 very clear statements: that where the child is, the classroom can be, that you do not need to cut down trees to furnish classrooms, that you don't need to import finished products as working solutions onto the continent of Africa for them to be successful, that you can build these 100% locally and you can improve them gradually on the continent as you go. With Zetu, we really intend to say 3 things. Have a sense of ownership, take that ownership and creatively translate it into results, which we call innovation, creative translation of information into a tangible thing, innovate and share that completely with the world. I think my proudest accomplishment to date is for sure getting over the fear of trying. Just do it. You know, you just do it. Just do it, see what happens. Whatever your plans are, approach them in your true sense, without any fear.
Takoradi in southern Ghana is what locals call the oil city. For ex-banker Peter Kweku Anoe, it's a place of opportunity.
I was working in a bank and I came on a holiday to see my family in Takoradi, and I chanced on an old school mate who is into shoemaking, whose company was folding up. So what I did was I partnered with him so that we could together help bring him back to business.
6 years later, Peter and his friend's social enterprise, Colix Venture, has established a successful shoe brand called Koliko Wear.
Our favorite design that really hits the market is our Koliko Chelsea boots. And this one is made out of waste woolen fabric. The inside too is woolen. The base or the sole is made out of car tie. That makes it more durable for people to use.
In fact, all of Peter's shoes are made from recycled materials. Around 15 million used garments are exported to Ghana every week, and much ends up in landfill.
most of us don't even think about textiles waste, the harmful they cause to human race and our environment in general. We are always unsure, so we are more particular about this rubber, this plastic waste. But textile waste too is very harmful, and they take no less than 200 years for them to decompose, which causes great harm to the environment. So Coleco Wear decided to use waste materials or recycled materials so that we can help the environment to be safe by also contributing to the recycling sector.
Peter sources recycled jute sacks and cloth from the local market and second-hand shops.
This is one of the shops I pick my raw materials from in the manufacturing of our shoes. These are imported to Africa, and they are all waste materials. And we use these materials in a way of protecting the environment and also giving financial assistance to the supplier.
Peter says it takes 3 hours to make a shoe from start to finish.
Depending on the design you want to do, you mark it on the material or the fabric that you intend using in making the footwear. From there, you go to the gluing side. That's the next stage. You glue both the outer side and the inner side together. Then you take it to the sewing station.
His company currently employs 5 locals, including a couple of apprentices, to produce an average of 50 pairs of shoes every month.
So there's a saying that if you want a nation to be empowered economically, they are supposed to employ the youth, because the youth have the energy, the youth have the strength. So Coleco Wear thought it twice that why don't we engage the youth, train them, give them skill, then also empower them economically. So that's the more reason why Coleco Wear works with the youth. What I would tell all the young designers is we should be more innovative, and also whatever we are doing, we should think about environmental protection, because if we destroy the earth, our next generation wouldn't have anything called the earth. So whatever we are doing, we should think green, we should think about circular economy.
Sustainability is at the heart of Coleco's ventures and a growing number of projects on the continent, as architects and designers turn to local materials to solve local problems.